So let me get this straight. A 14-year-old kid in the hills of North Carolina is behind the wheel of a souped-up 1940 Ford Coupe, trunk loaded with illegal corn whiskey, tearing down pitch-black mountain roads with no headlights on because headlights would give him away. Behind him, federal agents are trying to keep up and failing every single time. They never caught him. Not once. Not in his entire career as a moonshine runner. The fastest man in the American South wasn't on a racetrack. He was running from the law. And when they finally did get him, he wasn't behind the wheel. He was standing next to a whiskey still, holding a shovel full of hot coals. The man who could not be caught in a car was caught standing still. This is the story of Junior Johnson. And honestly, the more you dig into it, the more you realize that everything we think we know about NASCAR, about stock car racing, about the culture of speed in America traces back to one family in one tiny community in the Appalachian foothills and the illegal whiskey they've been making since George Washington was president. This is legacy motoring, and I spend way too much time thinking about the outlaw roots of American motorsports. If you're someone who loves the history behind the speed, the real stories behind the legends, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Alright, let me take you back. Ronda, North Carolina, 1930s, a speck of a community in Wilkes County, tucked into the Appalachian foothills about a short drive from what would eventually become North Wilkesboro Speedway. Here's the thing about Ronda. This was not a place with a lot of career options. You could farm, you could work in a furniture factory for about $40 a week, or you could make whiskey. The Johnson family chose whiskey, and they didn't just dabble in it. Robert Glenn Johnson Sr. was what locals called the kingpin of the moonshine business in Wilkes County. He ran dozens of stills scattered through the countryside and spent nearly 20 of his 63 years in federal prison for it. 20 years. Think about that. This man spent almost a third of his life behind bars and kept going back to the same business every single time he got out. The house was raided so often that Junior later said he had to climb over stacks of moonshine cases just to reach his bed at night. That's not an exaggeration. That's not Southern storytelling. When authorities raided the family farm in 1935, they confiscated more than 7,000 gallons of whiskey. At the time, it was the largest inland seizure of illegal alcohol in American history. This was not a hobby. This was an industry. And it had been going on in the Johnson family since the Whiskey Rebellion of 1791. The ancestors had been among the first settlers in the area, folks of Scots-Irish descent who arrived in the North Carolina foothills in the 1700s and brought their distilling knowledge with them. 150 years later, the tradition was still going strong, not because they were criminals by nature, but because the mountains didn't offer much else. The Great Depression had hollowed out these communities. Prohibition had shown everyone there was money in untaxed corn liquor. Even after Prohibition ended in '33, dry counties across the South kept demand high, and federal alcohol taxes kept the margins fat for anyone willing to skip the paperwork. Junior's maternal great-grandfather had served as the second highest-ranking Confederate general in North Carolina. The family had deep roots in these hills. They weren't going anywhere, and they certainly were not going to stop making whiskey because the federal government told them to. Now here's what most people don't realize about Junior's childhood. He was the fourth of 7 children. He first got behind the wheel at 11 years old. By 14, he was hauling liquor for his daddy, driving loads of white lightning down from the hills to the Piedmont cities, Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, High Point, sometimes as far as Norfolk, Virginia, delivering to thirsty sailors at the naval base. He knew every dirt back road between North Wilkesboro and Charlotte so well that he later claimed he could make the entire drive without ever touching pavement, except when he had to cross a paved road. Let that sink in. A teenager navigating an entire network of unpaved routes through the mountains in the middle of the night, no headlights, trunk loaded with mason jars of illegal whiskey, and he knew every curve, every dip, every cattle gate, every shortcut by feel. The thing is, he wasn't just a driver, he was a prodigy. The cars he drove were 1940 Ford coupes mostly, running flathead V8s or modified engines that had been worked over until they barely resembled anything Detroit ever intended. Heavy-duty springs in the rear to handle the weight of a full load without sagging and tipping off the law. Some runners installed what they called bootleg springs, a second set rigged to run side to side instead of front to back, activated only when loaded. The goal was to make your whiskey car look completely stock to anyone watching. A jacked-up rear end was a dead giveaway. A level car with 300 pounds of mason jars in the trunk was invisible. The revenuers, those federal alcohol tax agents whose entire job was catching moonshiners, had fast cars and roadblocks and numbers on their side. Didn't matter. Johnson modified his cars with a kill switch that could shut off one of the rear brakes independently, allowing him to throw the car into a controlled 180 at full speed. The bootleg turn, they called it, or the about face. You'd crank the wheel, hit second gear, stomp the gas, and swing the back end around in a perfect half circle, then tear off in the opposite direction before the law even understood what had happened. Think about that technique for a second. This is a teenager executing a precision driving maneuver at highway speed on a dirt road in the dark that most professional stunt drivers today would need multiple takes to get right. And he was doing it loaded with whiskey, with federal agents behind him, with prison waiting if he got it wrong. The revenuers didn't have anything that fast, so their main tactic was blocking highways and bridges. Two cars coming at you head on, you had to figure out how to turn around in a hurry or find a driveway, a yard, some gap in the trees to duck through. Junior said the agents would sometimes chicken out when he went off-road because they didn't want to get hurt. He didn't care. He also rigged a police siren and a red light into the grill of his car, and this is where it gets really interesting. One night, the revenuers had him boxed in near Millersville, barricades up, nowhere to go. They could hear the engine roaring around the bend, then they saw the flashing red light and heard the siren. Figured it was another agent coming through, so they pulled the barricades aside to let him pass. It was Junior. He blew past them and vanished into the dark. He was never caught on the road, not once. In his entire career running Moonshine, no law enforcement officer ever ran him down in a car. He later told interviewers that his Moonshine cars were faster and better than anything he ever drove in professional racing. No rules, no regulations, you could do whatever you wanted under the hood. And what Junior wanted was speed. By the mid-1950s, he was running 4 stills simultaneously with about 25 people working for him. When things got too hot in Wilkes County, he moved the operation to Mississippi, Louisiana, Atlanta. He bought liquor south and hauled it north. At one point, there were reportedly more federal agents in Wilkes County than anywhere west of the Mississippi River. Now, that might be an exaggeration. Southerners are known for that. But the fact that the story even exists tells you something about what the government thought of Junior Johnson and the Moonshine operation coming out of those hills. So here's the thing about moonshine runners in the 1940s and 50s. On weeknights, they were outlaws. On weekends, a lot of them raced stock cars. And the connection between bootlegging and stock car racing wasn't metaphorical. It was direct. The same men, the same cars, the same skills. NASCAR's founding in 1948 grew straight out of this world, and many of the sport's early stars learned to drive by running loads of illegal corn whiskey through the mountains in the middle of the night. Professor Daniel Pierce at the University of North Carolina studied this connection extensively and found that Moonshine's role in NASCAR's origins wasn't some colorful footnote. It was the foundation. The first performance cars in the South existed because your ability to make a living and stay out of jail was directly related to how fast your car could go while loaded with whiskey. Curtis Turner, another NASCAR Hall of Famer, started bootlegging at 9 years old. He once said, "Those were hard times in the hills, and you did things you shouldn't to get by." That could have been Junior's motto, or the motto of the entire sport. The illegal and the legal weren't separate worlds. They were the same world with different rules on different days. Junior made his NASCAR debut in Darlington Raceway in 1953. He was 22. He crashed and finished 38th. Not exactly a storybook beginning. That same year, he was arrested for the first time for alleged involvement in moonshining along with his father and brother Fred. They were convicted of possessing a distillery and fermenting mash, though a judge later overturned a conviction. Two worlds running in parallel, one legal, one not, both requiring the same skills, the same nerve, the same understanding of what a car could do at its absolute limit. His brother had talked him into trying the racing side, and once Junior got a taste of organized competition, the Moonshine Road started feeling a little small, though not small enough to quit. In 1955, his first full season, he won 5 races and finished 6th in the Grand National point standings. 5 wins as a rookie, driving his own car. Nobody's factory ride, nobody's big budget team, just a kid from Wilkes County who could feel what a car wanted to do before the car knew itself. That instinct, that ability to communicate with a machine through vibration and sound and the seat of his pants. That came from the mountains. It came from running loaded through the dark at speeds that would terrify most professional drivers in broad daylight. Every other rookie on the circuit had learned to drive on a track. Junior had learned to drive running from the federal government. The difference showed. Then in 1956, it all stopped. Junior had driven all night back from a race. His daddy asked him to go fire up the family still before dawn. Routine, something he'd done 100 times. But what Junior didn't know was that 18 federal agents had staked out the still overnight. They had the place surrounded, lying in the woods, waiting. Junior walked up to the still with a shovel of hot coals to start the fire. Someone jumped him. He threw the hot coals in the revenuer's face, a well-known agent named John West, who everybody in Wilkesboro recognized. West hollered out for the others to catch Junior Johnson. Junior ran for it. He knew where there was an opening in a fence gate down through the woods, and if he could hit it, he had a chance. But there were 15 officers scattered through the trees. They brought him down. Now you might be thinking, well, that's the end of the story. Moonshine runner gets caught, goes to prison, career over. But that's not how this works. Not with Junior Johnson. The irony was almost too perfect. The man who could not be caught in a car was caught on foot, standing still next to the very thing he'd spent years trying to protect. He was convicted of operating an illegal distillery. The still they found was capable of turning 20,000 gallons of mash into about 800 gallons of moonshine in 2 days, worth more than $2,000 at a time when the average weekly salary in Wilkes County was $40. Do the math on that. 2 days of work producing more than a year's salary. You start to understand why people kept doing it regardless of the risk. He was sentenced to 2 years at a federal prison in Chillicothe, Ohio. Prison was not pleasant. Junior later described it plainly. You had to get along and treat people right because when they cut the lights off at night, they could cave in on you, and you were lucky to survive it. No drama in the telling, no embellishment, just the flat, honest truth of what it was like. He kept his head down, did his time, and thought about what came next. The racing world moved on without him. Drivers he'd beaten regularly were racking up wins and points while he sat in a cell in Ohio. 11 months. That's what he served before his release. 11 months away from the track, away from the hills, away from everything that defined him. But here's the part that tells you who Junior Johnson really was. Prison didn't reform him, not even close. Look, if you're enjoying this, go ahead and hit subscribe. We do deep dives like this every single week, pulling apart the stories behind the legends. All right, back to it. Prison didn't break Junior Johnson. If anything, it clarified things. He came out in 1957 and went straight back to racing, and straight back to moonshining, though that part he kept quieter this time around. He later admitted he stayed in the whiskey business for another 10 to 15 years after his release, and he didn't scale down, he scaled up. Let me say that again because it's important. The man served time in federal prison for moonshining, got out, and immediately expanded the operation. From mason jars to full semi-trucks, from mountain back roads to interstate highways, whole tractor trailers of untaxed whiskey rolling up the eastern seaboard to cities like Philadelphia while his racing team was competing on national television. The audacity of it is almost impossible to process. But that was Junior. He operated in 2 worlds simultaneously and dominated both. By 1958, he was winning 6 races in a single season, including a stretch of 3 in a row and 4 out of 5. By 1959, he'd added 11 more victories and was widely considered the best short-track racer in the country, maybe ever. The man had come out of prison and gotten faster. Most people come out of a situation like that diminished, tentative, looking over their shoulder. Junior came out angry and motivated and drove like he had something to prove to every single person who'd written him off during those 11 months in Ohio. But the moment that changed everything, the moment that elevated Junior Johnson from great driver to genuine innovator, happened in February of 1960 at Daytona International Speedway, the second annual Daytona 500. And Junior's car was slow. Not a little slow, 22 miles per hour slower than the fastest cars in the field. His crew chief, Ray Fox, couldn't figure out how to close the gap. They were outgunned, outpowered, outresourced. On a 2.5-mile superspeedway, raw horsepower was supposed to be everything. Johnson didn't have it. The Pontiac he was driving was a dog compared to the factory-backed cars of Fireball Roberts and the other frontrunners. In practice, he was running in the back of the pack. At those speeds on that track, there was no way to drive your way out of a horsepower deficit, or so everyone thought. During a practice run, a faster car blew past him, and Junior noticed something. When he tucked in behind that car, when he got close to its rear bumper, his own car sped up. The air resistance dropped. The faster car was punching a hole through the atmosphere, and Junior was riding in its wake. He stayed glued to the faster car's bumper for the rest of the session, drafting, feeding off the slipstream like a cyclist tucked behind the pace car. On the last lap, he swung out and slingshot past. He didn't tell anyone what he'd figured out, not right away. This is where it gets really interesting. Junior Johnson didn't have a physics degree. He didn't run wind tunnel tests. He had no computational fluid dynamics software. He didn't even have a high school education in the traditional sense. What he had was a feel for aerodynamics that came from the same place as everything else in his life: direct physical experience. Years of driving flat out on dark mountain roads had given him an almost supernatural sensitivity to what a car was doing underneath him. He felt the drag decrease, he felt the speed increase, and he understood instinctively what it meant. A self-taught genius recognizing a principle of physics through the vibration in his steering wheel and the change in engine note. That's not just driving talent, that's something else entirely. He used that technique to win the 1960 Daytona 500 in a car that had no business being in the top 10, let alone victory lane. The other drivers figured it out fast. Within a year, drafting became standard superspeedway strategy. It remains one of the most fundamental tactics in stock car racing to this day. Every single restrictor plate race you've ever watched, every pack racing battle at Daytona or Talladega, every slingshot pass on the final lap traces directly back to a Moonshine runner from Wilkes County who felt something change in the air behind the faster car and understood what it meant before anyone else on the planet. Junior Johnson, Moonshine runner and federal convict, had changed the physics of an entire sport. He kept winning. 13 victories in 1963 alone. In the World's 600 at Charlotte that year, he had a 2-lap lead when a spectator threw a bottle onto the track and caused a crash. He walked away with minor injuries. The fans were more upset than he was. Junior's toughness was legendary. He drove through pain, through mechanical failures, through situations that would have put other drivers in the hospital. The mountains had taught him that you don't stop, you don't pull over, you don't give up. You keep your foot in it until the car falls apart or you cross the finish line, whichever comes first. Then in 1965, a man in a white wool suit showed up at a beer joint near North Wilkesboro. Tom Wolfe was a New York journalist who had absolutely no business being in the North Carolina hill country. Junior later recalled that the first time Wolfe walked in, it was about 90 degrees outside, and he was wearing a wool suit. The second visit, he'd switched to a different white suit. Not wool this time, but still white. Still conspicuously not from around here. Imagine this scene. A dirt floor beer joint in the Appalachian foothills. Everybody in work boots and t-shirts, and in walks Tom Wolfe, looking like he stepped off a yacht in the Hamptons. Wolfe spent weeks moving in and out of Wilkes County, talking to everyone, absorbing everything. Junior initially refused to give him an interview. Flat out told him no. But Wolfe kept showing up. He'd disappear for a while and people would think he was gone for good. Then somebody would call Junior and say Wolfe was in their kitchen asking questions. He was relentless. He talked to mechanics, wives, drivers, bartenders, moonshiners, revenuers. He drove the roads, he sat in the grandstands. He soaked up the language and the rhythms and the contradictions of a world that New York Magazine editors had never seen or cared about. Eventually, Junior relented. Not because Wolfe wore him down, but because Junior realized the man was actually paying attention. He wasn't there to mock anyone. He wasn't writing a hit piece about hillbilly criminals. He was genuinely trying to understand the culture that mainstream America had never bothered to look at. The result was an article published in the March 1965 edition of Esquire magazine, titled "The Last American Hero is Junior Johnson." Yes, it became one of the most celebrated pieces of American sports writing in history. Wolfe captured something that the establishment press had completely missed: the Southern obsession with automobiles, the moonshine culture, the dirt track heroes, the whole world that existed below the radar of East Coast journalism. The article was credited as a key work in what became known as the New Journalism movement. It even coined the term "good old boy." Junior Johnson became a national celebrity overnight, not just a racing hero, a cultural figure. In 1973, the article was adapted into a film called The Last American Hero, starring a young Jeff Bridges. Junior served as technical advisor. The movie was a modest hit. Bruce Springsteen put his name in a song, Cadillac Ranch, off the River album in 1980. Junior Johnson running through the woods of Carolina. The moonshine runner from Rhonda had become an American icon. But by the time Wolfe's article hit newsstands, Junior was already thinking about what came next. He retired from driving in 1966 at 35 years old, just walked away. 50 career victories, the most wins of any driver who never won a championship, a stat that says everything about the era and the man. He'd made only 7 official starts in his final season, ending with a top 5 finish at Rockingham in the fall. When asked why he quit, he said simply that he wasn't getting anything out of it anymore. If his car didn't break, nobody could outrun him, and that apparently got boring. The NASCAR schedule in those days was punishing. More than 50 races a season for nearly 8 straight years, teams competing 3 or 4 times a week sometimes. The pay was nothing compared to what it would become. Junior had won at places like North Wilkesboro, Martinsville, Charlotte, Daytona, Bristol. He'd proved everything there was to prove behind the wheel. The challenge was gone. But competition was still in his blood. It never left. So he became an owner. And that's where things got even bigger than anyone could have predicted. Junior Johnson and Associates became one of the most dominant teams in NASCAR history. In 1969, his driver Leroy Yarborough won the Daytona 500, the World 600, and the Southern 500 in the same season, the so-called Triple Crown of stock car racing, a feat that currently pays $1 million bonus and has rarely been matched. Junior had built that team from scratch. He prepared those cars with the same mechanical obsession that had once gone into his moonshine runners. Every detail mattered. Every advantage counted. Then came Cale Yarborough. From 1974 to 1980, Yarborough drove for Junior and won 45 races and 3 consecutive Winston Cup championships in 76, 77, and 78. 3 in a row. The only driver ever to do that. Still the only driver. Let that sit for a moment. In the entire history of NASCAR's top division, only one driver has ever won 3 consecutive championships, and he did it driving for a former moonshine runner and federal convict. Then came Darrell Waltrip. From 1981 to 86, Waltrip won 3 more championships under the Junior Johnson banner, including a stretch of 24 wins over 2 consecutive seasons that was absolutely staggering. Junior was the first owner in NASCAR history to win multiple championships with multiple drivers. 6 titles total as an owner, 132 victories, numbers that put him alongside any team owner in the history of motorsport. And here's a detail that connects everything and pulls the whole story together into something almost too perfect. In 1971, Junior Johnson was nearly broke. Ford, Chevrolet, and Dodge had pulled their factory support from NASCAR. Engines and parts were hard to come by. The sport was hemorrhaging money. Johnson announced he would shut down his team by the end of the year and go back to chicken farming. He'd actually built a successful poultry business with Holly Farms on the side. The origin story of that venture is its own piece of Southern folklore, involving a man who could somehow arrange delivery of 20,000 pounds of sugar for his moonshine operation and also figure out how to raise 100,000 baby chicks. Southern business dealings are their own kind of art form. But right around the time Junior was going broke, something happened in Washington that would change everything. President Richard Nixon signed a bill banning cigarette advertising on television. The R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, makers of Winston cigarettes, suddenly had a massive marketing budget with nowhere to spend it. They came to Junior first, wanting to sponsor his team. Junior listened. He thought about it. And then he told them something that revealed the scope of his thinking in a way that nobody expected. He said something along the lines of, "You shouldn't just sponsor one team, you should sponsor the whole series." He connected R.J. Reynolds executive Ralph Seagraves with NASCAR president Bill France Jr. The deal that followed created the NASCAR Winston Cup Grand National Series. It lasted 33 years, from 1971 to 2003, and it transformed NASCAR from a regional Southern curiosity into a national sporting phenomenon. Prize purses exploded. The schedule was streamlined from 48 races to 31. RJR moved the annual awards banquet to the Waldorf Astoria in New York City because they believed NASCAR deserved national attention in the media capital of the world. They introduced the Winston Million, a bonus of $1 million for any driver who could win 3 of 4 marquee events in a single season. Only 2 drivers ever collected it, Bill Elliott in '85 and Jeff Gordon in '97. RJR didn't just write checks. They brought professional marketing, public relations, media outreach, and promotional infrastructure to a sport that had been running on grit and duct tape and sheer stubbornness. They painted track walls red and white so the cars would look faster on television. They stationed Winston promotional teams at every race. They spent millions making stock car racing look like what it was becoming, a major American sport. Now you might be thinking, okay, Junior made an introduction. Lots of people make introductions. But here's the thing. Without that conversation, without a broke race team owner from the North Carolina hills sitting down with a tobacco executive who was looking for a new canvas, the sport's entire trajectory changes. There is no Winston Cup era. There is no explosion in television coverage. There is no corporate money flooding in. NASCAR might have stayed exactly what it was in 1971, a regional sport with regional following and regional money. Junior Johnson, the moonshine runner who couldn't get tobacco money to save his own team, had accidentally brokered the most important sponsorship deal in the history of American motorsports. The Winston years were NASCAR's golden age. The sport went from small-town dirt tracks to superspeedways packed with 100,000 fans. Television contracts grew. Merchandise sales exploded. The drivers became household names. And at the center of it, wearing plaid pants and collecting trophies, was Junior Johnson. But the law never fully left his story. On December 26, 1986, President Ronald Reagan granted Junior Johnson a full presidential pardon for his 1956 moonshining conviction. It restored his right to vote, wiped the felony from his record, and gave him something he hadn't had in 30 years: a clean slate. When asked about the pardon, Junior said it was the best Christmas gift he ever got. The pardon was fitting for a man whose entire life had been a negotiation between the legal and the outlaw, the legitimate and the renegade. He'd been a federal convict and a national hero simultaneously. He'd served time in the same era he was winning races. He'd built one of the most successful racing operations in history while, by his own later admission, continuing to run moonshine on the side. After retiring from team ownership in the mid-1990s, Junior stayed busy. He'd already built Holly Farms into a major poultry operation that he'd eventually sell. He raised cattle, he farmed, he invested. The man who'd grown up scrambling to survive in the Appalachian hills had become, by any measure, wealthy and successful on his own terms. Then in 2007, the circle closed in the most poetic way imaginable. Junior teamed with Piedmont Distillers of Madison, North Carolina to launch Midnight Moon, a legal moonshine brand based on his family's 100% corn recipe, made in small batches in a copper still authentic to the Johnson family tradition. He became part owner of the company, which operated out of a converted train station built in 1915. Piedmont was the first legal distillery in North Carolina since Prohibition. When they gave him a taste of the first batch, Junior approved. The man who'd spent his youth dodging revenuers, who'd served time for making the stuff, who'd built an empire on skills learned hauling it through the mountains at night, was now selling moonshine with a barcode and a tax stamp. He toured the country signing bottles, greeting fans, posing for pictures. The twinkle in his eyes suggested he found the whole situation appropriately absurd. In 2010, Junior Johnson was inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in its inaugural class alongside Bill France Sr., Bill France Jr., Richard Petty, and Dale Earnhardt. 5 names, the foundation of the sport. Junior contributed an operational moonshine still as an exhibit for the museum's Heritage Speedway section, because of course he did. His legacy touches every corner of modern motorsports and reaches back into the deepest roots of American outlaw culture. Drafting, the technique he discovered by feel at Daytona in 1960, is still used in every superspeedway race run anywhere in the world. The Winston Cup era he helped create defined 3 decades of the sport and spawns rivalries, traditions, and a financial model that every racing series eventually tried to replicate. Junior Johnson died on December 20th, 2019, at 88 years old. He'd been in declining health and had entered hospice care in Charlotte. His wife Lisa confirmed he'd been suffering from Alzheimer's disease. The kid from Rhonda, North Carolina, who used to climb over cases of moonshine to get to his bed, who threw hot coals in a revenuer's face at dawn, who won the Daytona 500 in a car that was 22 miles per hour too slow, who brokered the deal that made NASCAR a national sport, who got pardoned by a president and then went right back to selling moonshine legally with a smile on his face, was gone. Tom Wolfe had nailed it 60 years earlier. The last American hero. A kid born into illegal whiskey, a driver nobody could catch, an inmate, a champion, an owner, a businessman, a pardoned felon, a Hall of Famer, a moonshine salesman. Same man, all of it, start to finish. And there you have it, Junior Johnson. From moonshine to federal prison to the NASCAR Hall of Fame and right back to moonshine again. If you've got a Junior Johnson story or you think I missed something, drop it in the comments below. And if you made it this far, go ahead and hit subscribe. We do this every single day.